My son called me on a Wednesday and I almost didn't recognize his voice. Not because anything was obviously wrong. He sounded fine. He asked about my knee, asked if I'd watched the Leafs game the night before, made a joke about the weather in Ottawa being worse than usual for March, which is saying something, but there was something underneath all of it that I couldn't name, a kind of flatness, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized but wasn't fully present for. I told myself I was imagining it. I'm good at that. My son is 31 years old. He lives about 25 minutes from me with his wife and their daughter who just turned 4. He calls me every Sunday without fail, as since his mother passed 3 years ago. That's just who he is. Steady, reliable, the kind of man who shows up. So when my phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon while I was elbow deep in reorganizing the garage, I answered it thinking something must be wrong with the baby, or maybe the car or something practical he needed a second opinion on. Nothing like that, just conversation. Normal, easy conversation that somehow didn't feel normal or easy. I let it go. Told myself I knew to get out of my own head. That was the first mistake. I spent 28 years as a municipal building inspector for the city of Ottawa. It's not the kind of job that makes for good dinner party conversation, but it taught me something I've never been able to switch off. The habit of noticing when something doesn't sit right. A load-bearing wall that's been quietly shifting. A foundation crack that's cosmetic until it isn't. You learn to read the small signs before the big problems announce themselves. I was good at it professionally. I told myself I was equally good at it personally. I was wrong about that. Or maybe I just didn't want to be right. Let me back up a bit. My son married a good woman named Petra 6 years ago. She's from a large Slovak-Canadian family. Warm, no nonsense, the kind of person who brings soup when you're sick and tells you to your face when you have spinach in your teeth. I liked her from the first time I met her. Their daughter is named after my late wife, which I wasn't expecting and which I have still never fully recovered from in the best possible way. After my wife died, my son started calling every Sunday. He didn't make an announcement about it. One Sunday he called, then the next, and that became the rhythm. I retired from the city about 18 months ago. My pension from the municipal plan is reasonable. I own my house on the west side of Ottawa outright. I have some savings in a TFSA and a small RRSP I rolled over when I left. I am not a rich man by any measure, but I am comfortable, and I spent my working life being careful with money because no one was going to be careful with it for me. I mention all this because it matters to what came next. My son met the man through a home renovation project. That's how it started. Petra had been wanting to redo the basement, turn it into a proper playroom for their daughter, and a neighbor 2 doors down recommended a contractor named Stuart Falk. Falk had done their kitchen the previous spring, done it well, come in on budget, hadn't left a mess. That kind of contractor is hard to find in Ottawa, so my son hired him. The job went fine. Falk was professional, finished in 3 weeks, charged what he quoted. He was also, apparently, very easy to talk to. The kind of man who shows up on time, cleans up after himself, and stays for a coffee if you offer it. My son mentioned him once, casually, in August. Said he was a decent guy. Mentioned he did some side work helping people navigate the kind of home upgrade grants the federal government had been rolling out through the Canada Greener Homes program. Said Falk could help the neighbor access a rebate for a heat pump and save them something like $4,000 in paperwork headaches. I remember thinking, that's a useful person to know. I was an idiot. By the time my son called me on that Wednesday in March, Stuart Falk had been inside their home 6 or 7 times. He'd had dinner with them once, apparently, when the job ran late and Petra insisted he stay. He'd pushed their daughter on the backyard swing. He'd sat at their kitchen table and helped my son look over the paperwork for a different government grant program. One Falk said he knew well from working with other homeowners in the area. And he had started asking about me. Not directly. I want to be precise about this because the precision matters. He didn't say, what does your father have in savings, or how is his retirement income structured? He did it the way a careful person does it. Sideways. Through concern. He said things like, it must be hard on your dad, being in that house on his own. He said, a lot of guys his age have done everything right and still get caught out by inflation eating into a fixed income. He said the federal and provincial programs for seniors are genuinely good right now, but they're complicated, and most people who qualify never apply because they don't know where to start. He said he'd love to sit down with my son's father sometime, just to see if there was anything he was leaving on the table. My son. Because he loves me and had zero reason to suspect a man who'd competently renovated his basement and eaten Petra's roast chicken, said, "My dad's actually pretty sharp about this stuff. He spent his whole career in building inspection. He knows how government programs work. He's not someone you can easily fool." According to my son, Stuart Falk smiled at that and said, "That's exactly the kind of person these programs are designed for. Someone who knows how to read the fine print." When my son told me all of this, not on the Wednesday call, but later, after everything had already come apart, I recognized it immediately. He had positioned any future meeting as helpful, as a service. He had pre-answered the objection my son might have raised. "Your dad is sharp. He doesn't need help," by reframing it as the reason I qualified. It was clean. He was practiced. He had been using my son to build a file on me before I knew his name. I want to tell you something about the way this kind of thing works because I have since talked to enough people about it to know that what I'm going to say is not obvious until after you've seen it. The most effective frauds in this country right now don't come from a stranger calling your phone pretending to be the CRA. Everyone knows that one. Everyone's been warned about it. The ones that actually work come from inside the circle of people you already trust. Stuart Falk didn't need to establish credibility with me from scratch. My son handed it to him. Every meal Falk had in that house, every hour he spent on that basement renovation, every coffee he stayed for, all of it was collateral he could spend when the time came to approach me, not his credibility. Borrowed credibility, my son's credibility, transferred. That's the part that nobody warned you about. I met Falk for the first time at my son's house on a Saturday in late February. I'd driven over for lunch, normal visit, nothing planned. Falk stopped by in the early afternoon to drop off some paperwork related to a warranty on the basement work. My son invited him in. Petra made more coffee. It felt spontaneous. I understand now that it wasn't. He was exactly what the profile should have told me to watch for. Mid-50s, work-worn hands, comfortable in a way that reads as honest rather than slick. He didn't oversell himself. That was the thing I kept coming back to afterward. Every fraudster I'd ever heard about pushed too hard, smiled too much, moved too fast. Falk did none of that. He seemed almost reluctant to talk about his work. He asked me about the building inspection job, listened carefully, asked one follow-up question about how the city handled structural assessments on heritage properties, which was a genuinely interesting question that showed he'd thought about it. Then he moved on. I drove back to Ottawa that afternoon thinking, my son is right. He seems like a straight shooter. He waited 2.5 weeks before reaching out. It came as a text to my personal cell, which meant my son had given him my number, which my son confirmed later with no hesitation because Falk had asked for it under the pretext of sending me a link to a federal program he thought I'd qualify for. The link was real. The program was real. The program was real. It was a property retrofit incentive for homeowners over 60 through the Canada Greener Homes Initiative, combined with a provincial top-up through Ontario's home efficiency programs. Legitimate, verifiable, exactly the kind of thing I would have spent an afternoon reading about on my own. We texted back and forth over about 10 days. He was patient. He answered my questions thoroughly. He mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd helped about a dozen homeowners in the Nepean and Barrhaven areas navigate the combined federal-provincial application process. That most of them had received grants between $8,000 and $14,000, and that the process was genuinely complicated if you didn't know which forms linked to which. He said if I ever wanted to sit down and walk through it, he was happy to do that. No obligation, just a conversation. I said maybe. He said no rush at all. Then he went quiet for 12 days. My phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon. My son's name on the screen, but a Wednesday, not a Sunday. He talked about his daughter's new preschool program, about a problem he was having with the car, about a show he and Petra had been watching. Normal things. But the voice underneath them was off. Not wrong in a way you'd catch immediately. Wrong in the way I'd learned to read in him since he was about 12 years old, when something was bothering him and he was trying to decide whether to say it. At the end of the call, before he said goodbye, he said, "Hey, Dad. You remember that thing we started doing when I first moved out?" I went still. When my son was 19 and moved into his first apartment in Gatineau, he was working part-time and going to school, and I was 3 hours away at a family property on the Radeau Lake for most of that summer. We had an agreement. If anything ever went wrong, real trouble, the kind you don't want to explain over the phone, he would call me, let it ring twice, hang up, and call again. That was it. 2 rings, hang up, call again. I never told anyone about it. It was ours. A private signal we'd made one night over the phone when he admitted he was nervous about being on his own. And I was trying to figure out how to tell him I was nervous too. He'd used it exactly once, when he was 22 and his car broke down outside of Kingston at 2 in the morning and he didn't want to worry me by just calling outright. I'd driven through the night to get him. He hadn't mentioned it in almost a decade. Yeah, I said, I remember. Just been thinking about it lately. He paused. Anyway, love you, Dad. Talk Sunday. He hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. Then I got up, put my coat on, and drove to his house. He didn't look scared when he opened the door. He looked like a man who had been carrying something alone for too long and had just decided he was done carrying it alone. Petra was in the kitchen with their daughter. He steered me to the back room, the new basement, and we sat on the sectional they'd bought to fill it, and he told me. 3 weeks earlier, Stuart Falk had come by while Petra was at her mother's with the baby. He'd brought revised documents, not the general program overview from before, but a more formal package. A co-application structure, he called it. The idea was then multiple homeowners in a given postal code could apply jointly to unlock a higher grant tier that wasn't available to individual applicants. Falk said he'd done it with 4 other families in the neighborhood. He said my son and Petra qualified, that their renovation work in the basement counted as eligible improvements, and that the combined federal-provincial grant could be as high as $22,000 if the application was structured correctly. My son had questions. Falk answered all of them. Then he mentioned me. He said he'd noticed from their text exchange that I seemed hesitant to commit to a formal sit-down. He said he understood. People who'd worked in government for a long time were often skeptical of these programs, sometimes rightfully so, but he said there was a separate stream available to homeowners over 60 with fixed retirement income, and that it was genuinely one of the most underused programs in the province, and he thought I should know about it before the application window closed. He said it might land better coming from my son than from a contractor I'd only met once. He was asking my son to bring me to him, and he'd done it by framing it as help, as looking out for me. He'd manufactured my son's motivation before my son even knew he had one. My son said yes, not because he was naive, because Falk had spent months making himself trustworthy inside that house. My son said yes and felt like a good son for doing it. That's the part that had been sitting on him for 3 weeks. Not the agreement itself, but the moment he realized what it actually was. He looked at me in that basement and said, I told him about your pension, about the house. I thought I was doing the right thing. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder. You did nothing wrong, I said. I meant it completely. He was as much a target as I was, maybe more, because Falk hadn't just been using my son to access me. He'd been using the relationship itself, the fact that my son loves me. The fact that he wants to look out for me since his mother died. The fact that he would do almost anything that looked like helping his father. Falk had found that and leaned on it deliberately. But I needed my son to focus now because I knew enough about how this worked to understand that the window was narrow. I asked him 3 things. Had he or Petra signed anything or moved any money? He said no. They'd had one more meeting scheduled, a signing appointment, Falk called it, but hadn't gone through with it yet. Did he know if Falk had approached anyone else on the street with the co-application offer? He thought so. He mentioned an older couple at the end of the block who talked about some grant paperwork they'd signed with a contractor last month. He didn't know the details. Were there any documents? Anything Falk had left behind with account numbers, routing information, official-looking forms? My son went upstairs and came back with a manila folder. I borrowed their printer and copied everything in it. Then I called a woman named Carol Hewson. Carol was a senior investigator with the Competition Bureau's Fraud Prevention Unit in Gatineau. I'd worked alongside her office twice in my last years with the city on building permit fraud cases, contractors who were pulling permits for work they weren't licensed to do and pocketing federal grants for retrofits that were never completed. We weren't close, but we were the kind of professional acquaintances who pick up when the other calls. I'd spoken to her last in the fall. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I told her what I had. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, How much paperwork? Enough to start with, I said. She said, don't disappear on him. Keep the line open. If he contacts you about a meeting, agree to it. Don't push, don't pull. Just stay warm. I texted Stuart Falk that evening. Said I'd been thinking about what he'd explained, that I was still a bit skeptical but willing to hear more, and asked if his offer to sit down still stood. He responded in 9 minutes. Said, of course, that he respected my caution, that it was exactly the right instinct. Asked if the following Saturday worked, said he could come to me if that was easier. I said Saturday was fine. I spent the next 4 days going carefully through everything I could still access: property registrations, business filings, contractor license records through the Ontario College of Trades. Stuart Falk had a legitimate contractor license issued 4 years ago. His business registration was real. A numbered company operating as Falk Property Solutions, registered in a municipality about 40 minutes west of Ottawa, that I didn't recognize as a hub for anything in particular. No history before that registration. Nothing. Carol called me on Friday afternoon. She said her office had been tracking a similar operation in 2 other provinces. Different name, same method. Contractor entry point, neighbor endorsements, multi-stage approach to retirees with fixed assets, a grant program that was partially real, layered over co-investment structure that directed a portion of funds into an account that dissolved within 30 days of deposit. They needed a recorded solicitation, a formal pitch with paperwork. She said, when he puts documents in front of you asking for a signature or a deposit, that's what we need. Don't sign anything, just receive it. Saturday was cold, the kind of flat gray March cold that Ottawa does better than anywhere else in the country. Falk pulled into my driveway at 10 in the morning in a white pickup with his business name on the door panel, which I noted as either genuine confidence or very good theater. He had a zippered portfolio under his arm. He shook my hand at the door with a good handshake, not too firm. The handshake of a man who does physical work and has learned to modulate it in professional settings. We sat at my kitchen table. I made coffee. I let him lead. He was good. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters to understand how good he was. He didn't rush. He laid out the program structure slowly, referred to actual government documents, real ones, from real federal and provincial websites, and wove his company's role into the process so smoothly that it was almost impossible to identify where the legitimate program ended and the fiction began. He talked about heat pump incentives, about the federal portion being processed through Natural Resources Canada, about the provincial component flowing through a separate application portal. All of it real, all of it accurate. And then, underneath all of it, the co-investment component. A pooled holding account, he explained, where the grant funds from multiple applicants were briefly consolidated before being distributed to satisfy the joint application structure of the higher tier. He showed me a 1-page document that used the right language. It looked like something you'd get from a government contractor. It looked like something I might have issued myself 15 years ago for a municipal retrofit program. Then he said, what I'd suggest for someone in your position is an initial deposit to secure your spot in the current application window. He named a figure. It was just under $10,000. He said the window closed in 11 days. He said he understood it sounded like pressure, but that was just the structure of the program. There it was, the urgency, the deadline that wasn't real. I nodded slowly and said I'd like to look over the paperwork carefully before I committed to anything. He said, of course. He slid the folder across my kitchen table. I took it. I told him I might have questions early in the week. He said his door was always open. He left at 11:40. I photographed every page and sent it to Carol before his truck had cleared my street. By Tuesday, Carol's team had confirmed 3 things. The pooled holding account listed in the documents was registered to a numbered company with no operating history. The application window Falk had described didn't exist under either the federal or provincial programs he'd cited, and the numbered company, when traced through its directorship, connected to 2 similar operations in British Columbia and Alberta, both of which had been shut down before charges could be laid because the operators had moved on before investigators got traction. They picked Falk up on Thursday morning. I found out from Carol in the afternoon. I'm not going to tell you exactly what my son said when I called him. Some of it belongs to him. But I'll tell you that the first thing he said after a long silence was, I handed him the keys, Dad. I just handed them right to him. I told him what I have come to believe completely after everything I've seen in my working life, and in this, The people who do this for a living are not looking for callous people. Callous people are too unpredictable. They're looking for careful people. People with real assets. People who are protected by their relationships, by their love for their families. Because that love is the door. My son hadn't done anything wrong. He'd done everything right. He'd been a good son looking out for his father. Stuart Falk found that and walked straight through it. Later, after the charges were laid and we knew more about who Falk actually was, we found out the couple at the end of my son's street, a retired teacher and her husband, both in their late 60s, had transferred just over $17,000 into the pooled account 2 months before. They recovered most of it, not all. I think about that. I think about it often. I think about the Wednesday call I almost let go to voicemail. About what would have happened if my son had kept managing whatever he was carrying for another week, 2 weeks long enough for the signing appointment to come around. I think about the Saturday he came to my door without that old signal, and what I might have done differently. Which is nothing, because I wouldn't have known there was anything to do. Here's what I want you to hear in all of this. I had 28 years of professional experience reading the signs of something being built crooked underneath a surface that looked fine. And I still almost missed it. I missed the first call. I would have missed the second call if my son hadn't used something we'd made up together when he was 19 and nervous. And I was trying to tell him I was nervous too, without being his dad about it. What saved this wasn't my experience. It was a signal we'd never written down, never explained to anyone, that meant exactly one thing, and that my son knew, on the day he needed it, he could use. After everything had settled, on a Sunday in April, I drove to their place for dinner. Nothing special. Petra had made a pot of soup, the kind that takes all day. Their daughter was running laps around the living room in her socks, screeching about something only she understood. At some point during the meal, while we were talking about something else entirely, my son looked across the table at me and tapped twice on the wood with his knuckle. Then once more. I looked at him. He didn't say anything, neither did I, but we both knew what it meant. If there's someone in your life, a parent, a child, a sibling, a friend, and there's no private signal between you, make one. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. It just has to be yours. Because the people who want to take from you are counting on the fact that by the time you're certain enough to say something out loud, it'll already be too late. A quiet signal says everything without a word. It doesn't wait for certainty. It just says, I need you to come. That's enough. That's always been enough. I keep coming back to the moment my son tapped twice on that kitchen table in April. Once more. And then nothing. Just the sound of his daughter running in socks on the floor above us and the smell of Petra's soup, and the two of us sitting there knowing exactly what had just been said without a single word. That's the thing about trust. The real kind, not the kind Stuart Falk manufactured over coffees and basement renovations. The real kind doesn't need to explain itself. It just shows up. And when it does, there's no confusion about what it means. I've been thinking about what actually kept my family safe, and it wasn't my experience. 28 years reading crooked foundations didn't save us. What saved us was something much quieter and much harder to fake. My son had the integrity to pick up the phone when something felt wrong, even when he couldn't yet name what it was. He could have stayed quiet. He could have told himself it would sort itself out, that he'd handle it, that he didn't want to worry his father. A lot of people would have done exactly that. He didn't. That took a kind of moral courage that I don't think gets talked about enough. The courage to say, out loud or in code, I need help, before you're certain you need it. And then there's the matter of staying sharp. I almost missed the Wednesday call. I heard something off in his voice and I filed it away instead of following it. That was my failure, not his. The lesson I've taken from this is that being experienced doesn't protect you from complacency. It can actually accelerate it. I knew how these frauds worked in theory. I'd seen the template a dozen times from the other side of a desk, and I still sat across from Stuart Falk and thought, decent guy, because I was looking for the version of the scam I already knew, and he was running a version I hadn't seen in that context. Staying genuinely alert means staying genuinely curious, not just pattern matching against what you've already learned. That's harder than it sounds when you've been doing something for nearly 3 decades. The Hendersons lost $17,000. Not all of it came back. I think about them more than I probably should. They did nothing wrong either. They trusted a man who'd spent months earning the right to be trusted. The difference between their outcome and ours wasn't wisdom or caution or superior judgment on my part. It was a signal my son and I made up one night when he was 19 and we were both trying not to say we were scared. The difference was a small, stubborn act of connection that we'd maintained without even thinking about it for over a decade. That's what I want people to hear in this story. Not that you should be more suspicious or less trusting or more guarded with your financial information, though all of those things are true and worth doing. What I want you to hear is that the thing that actually protected my family was the fact that my son and I had built something between us that nobody else could access or replicate or weaponize. A private language. A signal that meant, I need you. Come now. No questions. Whatever that looks like for you and the people you love, make it. Keep it. Don't let it go quiet just because you haven't needed it in a while. You might need it exactly when you've forgotten it's there.